This is Sam Howarth, and I'm doing my Think Aloud on Hamlet's soliloquy, To Be or Not to Be, from the play Hamlet. So let's get started. If we look at the title, it says soliloquy, to be or not to be. That is the question. So the title says that the question is to be or not to be, and I'm not quite sure what that means yet, but I do know that to be is a verb that talks about a state of being rather than an action. So maybe the question has to do with what state of being is best. Also, the title says that this is a soliloquy, so from what we know from class so far, we should be picturing this scene as Hamlet talking to himself, since that's the definition of a soliloquy. As we go down, it says that this is by William Shakespeare. It's from Hamlet, spoken by Hamlet. So note here that the author is William Shakespeare, but the speaker is the character Hamlet, which is distinct from the author, and the speech comes from the play Hamlet, which is separate from the character Hamlet. So we have three separate things here going on. So it starts with to be or not to be. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. Okay, so this section is really dense, and it uses words in ways we don't really use them anymore. So I should try taking this apart and restating it in modern language. So this section would turn into, is it more moral to take all the awful things that life can throw at you and suffer through them, or is it better to take arms and fight against all those terrible things by... I don't know yet how Hamlet thinks he's going to end all the troubles of life, but I bet that the next part will tell us. So this part says, to die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep perchance to dream. Oh wait, in this part, so he links dying with sleeping, and then says that sleeping is the way that he can stop all the nasty things he has to deal with. So since he's linked dying and sleeping, he's talking about suicide, and whether it's more moral to suffer through the difficulties of the world or just kill himself. That's the meaning of to be or not to be then. It means to choose to live or not to live. So my prediction was on the right track, if not totally accurate. And if we back up just a little bit, the word shocks here is used in a strange way as part of the phrase natural shocks. So if shocks is used this way next to heartache, we might be able to guess, since they're similar, that natural shocks are the problems and difficulties that are a part of life. So that's my guess for that word. If we start reading the next section, it says, aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life? So, it looks like in this section, Hamlet starts the question, what happens after death? So he's asking, for in that sleep of death, what dreams may come? What might happen after death? Then he starts listing a bunch of phrases with this really negative imagery, like shuffled off this mortal coil, and calamity of so long a life, and he has a whole list of kind of injustices that he names, and they all make a picture that life is to be endured and suffered through. Then he asks a series of questions on a similar theme that kind of ask, why would anyone suffer through all this awfulness? The question doesn't seem to have an answer quite yet, so I'm going to keep looking for an answer later in the speech. So the next part starts with, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have, than fly to others that we know not of. So Hamlet here uses a metaphor to compare death to an undiscovered country from which no one comes back, and seems to say that the fact that no one can confirm what happens after death is scarier to people than the understood and known suffering that they know they'll have to endure as part of life. So this section ends up answering that big question that Hamlet set up earlier in that previous section. So if the question is, why do people, and Hamlet himself really, suffer through the negative parts of life? Well, because the other option, death, has unknown consequences, and that's more scary than actually suffering through life. So I'll go on to the last part, it looks like. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action. So here, Hamlet stops really directly talking about suicide, and he uses both some words that we don't really use anymore today, and some words that we still use, but in different ways and combinations. So, for example, I haven't heard anyone use the phrase natural hue in casual conversation in my life, but by combining the definitions of both words, we get natural from native and color from hue. So they're going to mean natural color. He also uses a word I've never really heard before, sicklied. So I'm going to guess that since the word has sick in it, it probably has to do with being sick. And since it has an ed ending, it's also probably a verb, because if we conjugate verbs in past tense, they have an ed ending if it's present. Excuse me, if it's past. So I would guess that sicklied means to be made to look sick. Once we made some sense of the words in this section, we can see that Hamlet uses metaphors, so those comparisons, once again, without using like or as, to compare commitment to taking action to a healthy skin color, and compare overthinking an option to the point of not acting to a pale, sick-looking skin color. So if we look at how he's using those metaphors, he seems to say that other people think too much about the consequences of their actions to actually do anything. But if we look back through the play, has Hamlet himself actually taken much action to solve his problems? So we can apply our knowledge of Hamlet's choices throughout the play here to notice that Hamlet spends most of his time weighing his options while never actually taking any action. And this speech is a great example of his inaction. We might classify the speech as an ironic speech, since Hamlet doesn't seem to realize that he's paralyzed in inaction as well as whoever he's talking about. All right, that's the end.